Good afternoon, or good morning, or whenever you happen to be watching this. So, for this informal conference, I kind of wanted to go over as we approach the end of our school year, um, teacher turnover, and specifically, I wanted to go over a couple things. I wanted to go over, let's see what I had here. Um, Teacher retention, how to get teachers to stay in the classroom, because the problem is I know a lot of good teachers either move on to another career or they're looking to get out of the classroom. Um, and if the career move was to always try to move on so that you can support teachers, then that's a healthy response. But if the teachers are just trying to get out of the classroom because what's going on in the classroom is too much and they're just trying to escape that, that can create this bitter cycle where they leave and creates bitterness within them, and then teachers that are under their purview as they're working in a capacity beyond just classroom educator, they feel that resentment. It gets them resenting things, so they move on, and it's this bitter cycle. So the teacher retention, all of the various factors that might play into why a teacher chooses to leave, what's within our realm to control, because the answer is we can't necessarily control everything, and we'd love to. As teachers, we want to be able to control all the things going on inside our classroom, and as administrators, all the things going on inside our school. But that is not realistic at all. Knowing how to delegate is probably the best way to say that, but being able to, as a one man, one woman person, like you can't control everything. Discipline that leads to turnover, the transparency factor on why that would lead to turnover, coachability, collaboration, all that good stuff. So from the top, wanted to talk about all the various factors. So I found this neat article right here where it's saying, stress and workload are undoubtedly a factor, but teachers experience more than a lot of other professions: unstable, fluctuated personal, situational, and professional scenarios. Teachers work intensively during term time, which increases stress and reduces work-life balance. I had a fellow teacher of mine probably say this the best. This is one of the only jobs where we can work all year long, work the hardest that we can, and then ultimately our performance comes down to how a 10-year-old woke up that day. And so knowing how to mitigate all those factors, knowing that there's a bunch of other things that go on, like the discipline going on within the class, can be a large part behind why a teacher might decide to leave. It's that lack of control that we so desperately crave. So that gets into the next thing: what is within our ability to control? And I kind of have it narrowed down to a couple things so far. I have the discipline factor, the transparency, the coachability, the collaboration, all those things. We can't control what goes on in our students' lives. We can't necessarily, as administrators, control what goes on in our teachers' lives. But there are certain things in regards to discipline and all the things that I've already mentioned now probably 4 times that we do have the ability to control. And just mitigating any single one of those factors is going to play a large part. I'm going to put this up so that I know which one that I'm talking about currently, because I'm jumping all over the place. So just kind of going in this order, and there is more than this, but going in this order so that we recognize what the timetable is here. So in discipline, I'm not talking about just getting the kids to behave. That's not necessarily something that's ever going to be permanently fixed, because the way that I've always told parents, as a classroom teacher, is a 10-year-old is going to be a 10-year-old. there's just certain behaviors that a 10-year-old has that, yes, we should absolutely hold them accountable for those behaviors. That's how they learn that the behaviors are not acceptable and that they grow out of that. But a 10-year-old is going to do things that an adult wouldn't ever dream of. And so understanding a realistic mindset behind that, what we can do as administrators, though, is help our teachers hold the kid accountable. So a lot of times, that goes into, if a teacher needs a break from the kid, pulling the kid out, letting them know this is why this is happening. Today, I had a kid that needed the break from another teacher, and so they came to me. They didn't particularly want to. They thought they were in trouble, but we had to have a sit-down conversation, be like, dude, you got sent out because you're acting this way. And right now, that way is frustrating, and you have to take into account all the other kids in that class that you are disrupting from. Whenever we returned, it wasn't just, go back into the classroom now. I had the kid wait out in the hall, and I walked in and I asked the teacher, are you ready for him to return yet? Because a lot of times, if the kids are just put back into the classroom, it makes it feel as if no discipline's on at all. We need to make sure that the teachers that are frustrated from this situation also feel seen and heard. They feel like discipline has been handled. And so I let her know, this is what we talked about, this is what we're doing. Please let me know how he's doing at this point in the day, because I'm going to check back in. There needs to be follow-up in the disciplinary conversations. And I can't go super into specifics about what was said or done, but that's the general gist, is the follow-up, letting them know that there's going to be something after this, that there wasn't just a talk. Transparency. I feel like as a rational adult, this is probably what contributes, in my opinion, to the most amount of turnover, is the lack of transparency between administration and teachers. So, recently, I have discussed with a lot of teachers how they feel frustrated about the discipline. And so I brought the concerns to our admin team, and it was a very civil conversation, but it was like, hey, we have this documentation. We've provided all the documentation that was asked, and kids have gotten to this step in the disciplinary process, and nothing's being done. They're just being sent back to class. What's going on? What was the point in this documentation? And our administrators said, you know what, it sucks, and we agree with you, something should be done. The problem is we don't have the staffing to be able to really do anything about it. We can only handle 2 or 3 kids at a time, because what happens is, if the kid gets something like ISS, because they need that consequence. If you have 10 kids that have ISS but no ISS teacher, then they're following administrators around for the day, and then the kid's going to view that as essentially a field trip all day long. They get to walk around and see other classrooms and walk around with the important people in the building, and to them it's fun. And so, and she's like, and we can't just leave them up in the office all day, because then they'd be in an office unattended all day, and these are the kids that definitely should not be unattended. And so when that was explained to me as a teacher, and whenever I explained it to my coworkers, what was told to me, there was still some, I'm not happy about that answer, but there was a lot more understanding as to why the discipline wasn't happening. It wasn't that administration didn't want to, it's just the logistics behind it. And so if we were upfront about that from the beginning, I feel like it could curve a lot of the resentment that goes on there, is just saying that this is why. Something as simple as in an office referral, typing back, administrator actions, it has that slot there, not just the actions, but why the actions took place in the first place. Talk to student because this is a first time offense. Did this because of student's BIP, XYZ. Just explaining the thought process behind what was going on. Because a lot of teachers, they're like, if we have to explain our thought process and explain all of our documentation, they feel that it's fair that it goes both ways. If you're asking someone to do something, you should be willing to do it yourself. What do we have here? So the next thing that I had was the coachability aspect of it. as someone that has struggled with this, especially in my first couple years of teaching, a new teacher does not know what they don't know. And it's not a I'm being lazy thing. It's not a I'm not willing to put in the work, but there's so many aspects of being a teacher that you don't even realize that you're unaware of until the situation arises that it can create a huge shock when you realize this is how much when you finally realize this is how much I need to improve upon. And so if we can have some sort of like strict, structured coaching process take place, I feel like for a lot of at least the new teachers, maybe not the older ones, because by then they've got a lot of their practice figured out, but those first 5 year teachers, those, 50% of teachers burn out within the first 5 years. I feel like if there was a solid coaching structure in place, that would help a lot. I know that recently they've kind of done away with the alternative certification programs, at least in the current sense, where we have teachers apprentices and whatnot. But especially for a lot of those people, a solid coaching process would have been very helpful because they didn't even have the benefit of a university structured route, and university would be the first people to tell you, like, we can give you all the tips, but there's going to be a certain amount that you have to figure out yourself once you're in the classroom. But at least we had the tips as a university route. A lot of the people that went through things like I teach and whatnot, they didn't even necessarily have that. They just got one or two self-paced theory classes, and then they were thrown into the fire. And I don't know that it's one or two, but based off of what I've heard about how little it has prepared. So having something solid, a solid coaching process, weekly structured like check-ins so that administration can come in and see how that person's doing, offering advice, knowing that this is something that I need to address that they're not going to address because they don't know that it's something they need to address. Anyway, so moving on. What I also have is collaboration. So as administrators, we need to, in order to get teachers to pretend to want to stay in the school, we need to focus on collaboration. Teaching is a weird job where we constantly talk about our lesson plans, but we don't necessarily actually work super closely with another teacher, because at least at the elementary level, let me rephrase that. At the elementary level, a lot of times you are teaching on an island, especially if you're a self-contained class, because you are with those kids for 8 hours a day minus specials. Maybe you'll get lunch off if you don't have lunch duty, or recess. You'll get one of the two, but a lot of times you're by yourself. So figuring out how to bridge that gap with other teachers, make it not as lonely, make it to where there is someone there regularly that you can lean on every day. We live in a world where 90% of jobs you're going to collaborate with other people, and 90% is a very conservative number. I feel like it's probably higher. But you collaborate with other people. You can't run a business by yourself, at least a large one. You can't be an accountant without working with a boss. Someone somewhere, unless you own the business, is going to be your boss. So you have to know how to collaborate with your boss. Once you get to the college level, the students are going to be asked to collaborate with their classmates there, 100%. So we need to make sure that knowing how to collaborate is modeled to our teachers, because if our teachers have to teach our students how to collaborate, it's only fair that they also too know how to collaborate. So we need to foster a sense of belonging, a sense of teamwork that goes beyond just icebreakers at the beginning of the year in PD. But it also needs to go beyond awkward, PLC meetings where we run through a script and then move on. It needs to be meaningful. We need to model our lessons to other teachers. We need to offer feedback on those lessons. We need to act as the students in those lessons, and not, with a bunch of other teachers kind of giggling like, whatever, I'll act like a hooligan. Give the teachers roles. You're going to be the straight A student. You're going to be the student that sleeps throughout this. And then give them moments to be like, okay, so I noticed you did this in the lesson. What are we going to do to fix that? Well, I have this suggestion. So that's what our PLC meetings need to be. We need that role play opportunity so that we can, work out the kinks in a lesson. And nothing's ever going to be perfect, but hearing from the 20, 30-year veteran is going to help out those first year teachers a whole lot. A whole lot. So, like I said, we can't fix everything as administrators. There's so much that comes into our school that we don't have control over. All the stuff that's going on in people's personal life comes into our school all at once. All we can control is a few things of that. But out of those things, I feel like these are probably the biggest four that are going to make a large difference in teachers wanting to stay, teachers moving on to other careers, teachers deciding that they're going to retire 5 years early. I feel like if a lot of this was addressed by administration in a more meaningful way, then it would help. And it's not to say that they're not trying to be addressed. It gets down to that transparency piece that I mentioned, explaining, hey, we're trying to address this. This is why we're approaching it this way. That also reminds me of one more thing, but one more thing that would help is knowing when to admit that something is not working, because a lot of times we try to find a solution to a problem that doesn't work, and that's fine. If we are looking, then that's great. We're looking for an answer. But if that answer doesn't work, we need to be able to admit that it doesn't work, scrap that plan, and move on to another plan to try to address the problem. Because if we don't scrap the original plan, then all we're doing is piling up work. And that is a large part behind, I think, teacher turnover, is the amount of work that's going onto them. If it's not working, why are we keeping it? We need to be able to say, this plan didn't work, get rid of it, we're going to try this plan now. And wait a meaningful amount of time to see if it's truly not working. But if it ain't working, don't keep it. Anyway, that's what I got. I want to flesh this out more because we are currently doing our campus improvement plan, and I want to be able to bring this to my field supervisor, my site supervisor. You're my field supervisor. But I want to be able to bring it to her and be like, hey, this is the things that I think are causing a large amount of teacher turnover. So I don't know what y'all's plan is, ask her questions about that. But that was kind of my general thought process over everything. I look forward to any feedback that you have to offer, and thank you. If this is the last time that, we communicate, thank you so much for an amazing semester and an amazing program. You have a great rest of your day. Bye.